gentlemen, this next event features senior leaders from across the defense industries and associated career fields. Our moderator, Ms. Carol Howitz, Colonel, United States Air Force retired, who most recently served as a senior military advisor for the Ministry of Defense for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, is a past national LOA president and currently serves on the LOA Board of Advisors. Please welcome Ms. Howitz and our panelists.
Good morning. Welcome to our panel, where we spotlight the vital relationship between our industry partners and our military. Our industry partners, together with our military. These collaborations form the backbone of military logistics, reinforcing everything from maintenance to munitions and the integrity of our supply chain. Our industry partners are not merely essential, they are the foundation of our national defense, offering vital support, innovative solutions, and collaborative efforts that secure our nation's security and sovereignty. Now let me introduce our distinguished panel members. As our diamond sponsor this year from the Boeing Company, I'm honored to introduce Jenness Simler, Vice President of Contested Logistics Solutions. Her distinguished career spans an influential tenure in government, where she provided expert guidance on the U.S. House of Representatives Armed Services Committee. At Boeing, her leadership in government operations and defense policy has been instrumental in driving forward Boeing Global Services strategic initiatives. From shaping national defense policies to enhancing robustness of our military supply chains, Jenness has applied her formidable experience to some of our nation's most critical logistics challenges. Her direct involvement in defense science and technology and her work on the Combating Terrorism Technology Task Force demonstrate her commitment to innovation and security. With experience rooted in both legislation and practical engineering, including spearheading advanced materials and technologies at the Office of Naval Research, Jenness embodies the spirit of progress that is vital to our industry. Please let's welcome Jenness Simler.
Thank you.
Also joining us today is Mr. Bob Reny, the Chief Revenue Officer of .ai, with an impressive 20-year trajectory in information technology, beginning with the United States Air Force. A prior field chief technology officer and a certified information systems security professional for 24 years, Bob has a deep background in network security and has now turned his expertise to the cutting field of artificial intelligence. His work focuses on leveraging AI to enhance digital threat intelligence, ensuring greater operational efficiency for a diverse range of clients, including government bodies and global corporations. Bob is a visionary in utilizing real-time data for streamlined solutions and risk mitigation. Thank you for bringing .ai to LOA this year as a diamond sponsor. Please give a warm welcome to Bob Reny. Another diamond sponsor this year is Lockheed Martin. It's my privilege to introduce Steve Hoog, a distinguished veteran who has seamlessly transitioned from his notable military service as the Air Force Assistant Vice Chief of Staff and Air Expeditionary Force Center Commander during Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom to a pivotal role in the aerospace industry. Over the last 6 years at Lockheed Martin, Steve has played a crucial role in the sustainment of cornerstone aviation assets like the F-16, the F-22, and the F-35. Currently, he's spearheading initiatives in resilient logistics, ensuring Lockheed Martin Aero's products remain robust in the dynamically challenging contested environments. His expertise promises to be invaluable in our discussion today. Please welcome Steve Hoog. And our final diamond sponsor this year is Mass Virtual. I'm honored to introduce Jonathan Bland, a trailblazer in the realm of extended reality for professional training. As a business development manager at Mass Virtual, Jonathan brings an impressive track record of 28 years of service as an Air Force colonel, infusing his deep leadership expertise in the tech world. His mission is to bridge capability gaps and revolutionize workforce readiness with cutting-edge virtual reality solutions like Virtual Hangar and Virtual Garage. Under his guidance, Mass Virtual not only leads in immersive training, but also in delivering measurable value to clients in defense and beyond. Please join me in welcoming the man who's shaping the future of training, Jonathan Bland. So we're going to jump into the questions right away, exploring some key themes in our aerospace and defense industry, touching on supply chain evolution, sustainment technology, integrated defense, the theme of our symposium, innovation in data analytics, training innovations, and if we have time, we are going to touch on policy initiatives and what we might need from government. And then we really want to get to some Q&A. So let's get started. The first question I'm going to give to Jenness in reference to supply chains. So Jenness, in what ways are you observing aerospace and defense supply chains evolving? And what do you believe are the emerging opportunities for industry, both traditional and for the disruptors?
Thank you so much, Carol. And hey, good morning. I can't believe I was joking that on a Friday after a long week before a holiday weekend for some, I would consider this to be success if there were 5 people left. And y'all, I mean, this place is packed. Thank you so much. We really, really are grateful for your time and your questions. Hopefully we can get to that. I mean, supply chain. Those are the 2 words that kind of are on everybody's lips all the time these days. And so I thought about what more could be said about it. It is certainly true that, that we need to start considering our supply chains. And by we, I mean government, and I mean higher tier suppliers all the way down. We need to start considering our suppliers not just as suppliers, but as partners. And that sounds like a platitude, but here's what I mean by that. The reality of our supply chains in the aerospace and defense industry has changed. And we have seen, I mean, the data bears it out. There is a shrinking defense industrial base. If you look at the previous decade at small business awards, they have shrunk by about 43%, even when obligations on those small business awards were going up by about 15%. So we have a shrinking small business base, but it expands to all sectors of the defense industrial base. The Government Accountability Office has done some assessments on this for us, and they estimate that in that same period, we went from about 142,000 participants in the industrial base to about 97,000. That's a huge reduction. And it can't be attributed just to mergers and acquisitions. It can't be attributed to defense budgets, which over that same period of time, went up and down, but not at that kind of rate, over a third. And you also have to take it in context with the overall economy. In that same period of time, GDP was growing, our economy was growing. So companies are choosing to exit the defense industrial base. And there's a whole nother conversation for another time we can have about why that might be the case. But it is simply a reality. It is a new reality. We have more single and sole source suppliers. We have constrained capacity. We have seen lead times be reset, and not to the good. Lead times tend to be increasing. And coming out of COVID, from a Boeing perspective, we've talked to many suppliers who have told us stories about, look, our workforce has reset. we went from an average tenure of about 20 years experience amongst our workforce to about 6 years. And that kind of loss of learning and experience has its toll. It has its toll in terms of the amount of time it takes. I mentioned lead times. It has its toll in terms of what labor costs, not just in terms of labor rate, but the number of man hours that are required to do the same kind of tasks. I know Boeing has experienced a similar phenomenon in terms of the reset of the workforce. So given those new realities that are here to stay, what follows is that the remaining defense industrial base, our supply chain participants, have a shared sense of success and a commitment to success. Our customer success is vital to the remaining participants in this industrial base who choose to stay. And as a result, we have seen an increased demand for information sharing from our customers. Certainly, I know that's true in terms of on Boeing's part, and an increased investment in internal risk management capabilities and third-party risk management. We hear a lot about supply chain illumination and companies that are doing those kinds of activities and where data can be brought to bear. And so I take that new environment and I look at it and I say, okay, well, what are the opportunities in this new supply chain reality? And they really are, I think, opportunities for those who are willing to invest in resiliency and that kind of information and risk management sharing expertise and analytics. That's true for both our customers and being better buyers for our suppliers by having those kinds of programs in place. I also see, and we all see, that the US government has begun to awaken to that reality. We have seen investments on the US government's part. For too long, what we've seen are US policy solutions, particularly on the legislative side, that focus on concentrating demand. Well, if we can just say that you can only buy from X, Y, or Z, or put these kinds of requirements in place, that will somehow, by consolidating demand, create a supply base. That hasn't worked. What we see now, the government waking up to, there are also investments that are required if you want that kind of assured access to supply. So CHIPS Act is an obvious place. We've seen increased investments in terms of Defense Production Act and IBAS and some other programs. That's all to the good. But we also need to think about other kinds of solutions, like removing any barriers that may be in place when our companies in the supply chain, up and down the supply chain, want to invest, use data to get ahead of need based on historical or anticipated demand and buying ahead of need so that we can really reduce those lead times when our customer needs those parts. And that we're not whipsawing our supply chain by orders that come in and they're needed now, even though lead times may be, years or months away. That's going to require some changes in terms of financial management regulations, certainly approaches that some of the oversight agencies have toward those kinds of investments. And then finally, we need to make sure that across the board, these kinds of policies are aligned to create a clear demand signal for that supply chain. And so there's some tactical examples that I just gave in terms of contracting and buying ahead of need, but also as our leaders, like Secretary Lohman, rolls out this regional sustainment framework. What industry and our suppliers really need is an understanding of where the services are aligned to that and the combatant commanders are aligned to that, and how those investments and, again, policy changes are being aligned consistently so that we can understand how to respond, make investments now to be responsive. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jenness. Okay, next question. Let's take to Steve, and let's take supply chain a little broader out to sustainment. How is industry using new technologies and processes to improve sustainment in peacetime and in conflict? And then how do you see industry adapting in future environments as a complement to organic sustainment capabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question, and to follow up, it's great to see everybody here today. I think one of the things I would recommend as I look at all the young officers and senior NCOs here is that as you establish your cohort group, the group that you count on for advice as you go up, reach out to somebody on the industry side as well as you get more senior. And industry really is your partner. And I was looking at the Lockheed and the Boeing booths, And I think between each of us, we got about 300 years of military experience. So if nothing else, we can tell you war stories that probably aren't true anymore. But you can get some relations. And on the flip side, this is how industry really learns about what you need. It's not through the RFI. It's through the day-to-day contact. So just think about expanding your network a little bit. So today, I mean, AI, machine learning, I mean, we're going to have some discussions on how that goes forward. The way we kind of set up the booth here is I looked at the today and then tomorrow. So today was about what are the tools that we could give to the guys and gals in the fly line to make their job easier. You start with things like Hoog Fusion, which is AI, machine learning on demand data after all those millions of hours of C-130s. I can look at the tail number, I can look at the parts, I can tell you which tail you should send on the road. I say, you might want to swap this part out, and you need to take these two with you. So that's an example of a hands-on case. Another tool that we developed for the engineers was called Divergent, where you could see how long it took to do a maintenance task across the entire F-35 fleet. So if it takes, on average, the engineer says 45 minutes to do this task, but you go to the database and you find this base takes an hour and a half, or this base takes 5 minutes because the guy didn't even put the data in. Data quality is a key part of analytics. That's a tool that you can use. And then when the pro super finds out that he can get a report that says, hey, I wonder how I'm doing compared to my peers, either at the wing or across the F-35 fleet, now that becomes a tool you can see what best practice is. Why is it that they're taking half as much time as anybody else? Another tool using data and native language processing is called Vision. This tool was basically built, it took every action request ever put in on the F-35 program, and it has it in a database. And it's searchable via language, it's searchable by a part, a panel, you name it. And when you get an action request in, if you don't have the joint tech data designed to cover it, that tool is now a great asset for the engineers, both in Lockheed and the government side, to use to say, this is where we need to go. And of course, the right answer is once you get 2 or 3 ARs that have the same question, it's probably time to put it in your tech data in the first place. So those are the today examples of some of the things that we're doing, and I know the other companies here have similar programs. So how do you get it in today's maybe legacy airplanes? The real question is, what are we doing next? When we talk about designing a true digital platform that's using system-based modeling from the very beginning all the way to the end. And Lockheed, like our competitors, have got, we had a program called Star Drive, we use 3DX, we use different tools to go do this. And what triggered me yesterday was when General Hawkins was talking about the digital depot. So the question becomes, we have these contests today and we're assisting on data access using digital tools. When do you bring the depot into planning when you've got a firm commitment on a program? And I suspect that before we even cast the first part, we ought to have a couple of the organic engineers in there looking at this so that we don't throw things over the transom like we do today. Well, I did it, now this goes and it goes. And every time somebody touches it costs money, right? So how does it flow digitally all the way to the flight line? And I suspect if we're not looking at those 12 elements of the IPS through the digital back and forth lens, we're missing opportunities. I'm convinced there's things that would be different on airplanes today if we had the right maintainers up front doing that virtualization of servicing something as we go forth. So there's the today's effort, there's the tomorrow's efforts. And I think we're all leaning in the right direction. And I think we're all looking for this resilient logistics easy button, the one that you want to hit, and it doesn't exist. Because for supply chain issues, for the adversary out there, we're just going to be some hard work. And I think General King nailed it yesterday. He said it's a wicked problem, but the only way to get after it is to get at it. That's it. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Steve. All right, let's go on to Bob. Bob is a fascinating guy. I hope you went by his booth and saw what .ai is doing and met his twin brother. But Bob is fascinating in the things that he has done and where he is going in the future. So Bob, technology evolution has been dominated by robotics. And we're seeing the ups and downs of market hype with generative AI. How do you see the market evolution in software and the Internet of Things landscape impacting military logistics or logistics in general?
That's interesting. We talk about AI, but I want to ask a question to the crowd real quick, because a question was asked of me. How many of you use Amazon Prime, right? How many of you have an iPhone or an Android device on your pocket, or multiple devices, one on your wrist and everything as part of your technology? Keep your hands up for a second, okay? That technology is created a bias for us as the service provider to you. Do you know what that bias is? It's the expectation that now I have information and I need to know. So when you buy from Amazon, you get an acknowledgement that you have an order, when it's shipped, and when it's going to arrive at your house. How many of you do that today in your current jobs, are trying to service your warfighter and present that same information to your customer, right? And they have the same bias, because they're using the technology that we all use at home that now we want to deliver to our customers, right? Is it some kind of magic? Not necessarily, but it is complex. There's this digital thread that needs to be followed from Bob Reny receiving an order to now I acknowledge that, yes, I can fulfill that order and I have the inventory to be able to manage it. And then now it's in a staging area, I've put a shipping label on it, and I can give you the shipping label information. So now you can start to forecast based on when the shipper ships it to receive it at your location. That digital thread is not easy to change, especially when we look at the organization that is the DoD, that has this large paper trail that starts with clipboards. How many of you have been involved with inventory? Right, where you pull out a clipboard and you walk by and you write down a serial number, and then you write down what part it was, and what do? You walk over to a computer, you type that into an Excel spreadsheet. Now, I have dyslexia. I type things wrong, right? Now that what might have been correct at one point might be wrong put into an Excel spreadsheet. Therefore, my twin brother has to go fix my work and go re-audit what I did. And that process tends to happen over and over and over and repetitive. So what needs to be done is we need to turn that upside down, change the way we're interacting with our assets. And think of assets not just as the bag of socks that need to go onto the mission, or the bag, or the bullets. It's also the people. People are part of the assets that we need to manage. Are they going to be there at the right time? So when you start to gather in critical intelligence about where the people, the process, and the technology they need to do something across this digital thread, and that is a lot of really complex information. From, how many people can we put on a plane to what gets loaded onto that same plane to be able to support. That's a recipe that can then be tracked. We've already talked about it with Lockheed and how they do it with their F-35, to be able to say when somebody needs a new bolt, how do we get that bolt? And then how does that customer know that it's been shipped to DLA? And then DLA gives it to, I think, Transcom. And then Transcom ships it out, right? That should be as simple as Amazon provides it to you. Now, the technology exists so we can do that, but it's going to take this crowd to be able to implement that technology and actually look at yourself and say, you know what, this optimization will also help my compliance, reduce my risk, right, and increase operational efficiency.
Fascinating. I don't know, I'm just fascinated by you, Bob. Okay, Jonathan, we've talked about the importance of industry and our partners a lot this week, and we've been very fortunate this week to have several allies and partners also come to LOA, as we do every year. So the theme of this year's symposium is about driving integrated deterrence. Could you elaborate on Mass Virtual's role in contributing to the advancement of integrated deterrence, and how do these efforts enhance the combat credibility of the U.S. and allied forces?
Sure, thanks, Carol, and thanks for leading this crowd today. I appreciate it, and thank you all for being here. It's really encouraging to see all of you here still fully engaged on a Friday morning. So deterrence is a very complicated topic. Obviously, we won't cover it all. But deterrence sure beats the alternative, win or lose. So I hope that everyone here is doing what you can, even down to the lowest airman, to contribute to our nation's ability to do that very difficult task. For the military piece of deterrence, it certainly helps if you have the world's most capable hardware, right? The world's most capable weapon systems, and we do. But that's not enough, right? We have to show the willingness and the ability to use those weapon systems, and more difficultly, for this crowd, the ability to sustain those weapon systems wherever they need to go in the world for as long as they need to be there. That's a really big ask. And operations and logistics, though, are only as good as the people that run them, all right? And in my opinion, even with as much talent as we have across the military, and in the Air Force in particular, because I'm biased, the talent still needs training in order to meet its full potential. So again, in my opinion, the effectiveness of our nation's deterrence, the effectiveness of the military piece of our nation's deterrence, really hinges on the effectiveness of your training, how well you are training your airmen. Here's the problem. Training takes time, training takes money, training takes people and equipment. How many of you have enough of those? Don't raise your hand, because your neighbors will conspire against you, but how many of you have enough of those, right? I would gather that no one in here would raise their hand. Maybe you've got enough of one, but I'm a maintainer, and I know you don't have enough airplanes at least, all right? So you're probably hurting in the rest of them as well. So if you don't have enough of those assets, those resources to do the training that you need to do to be effective, what's the risk? The risk is that you're going to settle for good enough training. You're going to settle for, well, the way we've always done it, the way I did it way back when I was young, right? It was good enough for me. It's not good enough, right? Your enemies are going to notice. They're going to notice in your activities. They're going to notice in your attitude. They're going to notice in your readiness, and they're going to take advantage of that, and that's not good enough. So the good news is there's technology out there to help you with that problem, and that's why Mass Virtual exists, right? This is our passion. We're using these emerging technologies that are proving themselves today to measurably and meaningfully help you change the way that you do your training so that you can improve your readiness and in a measurable and meaningful way reduce the resources that it takes to do that. It's pretty exciting. We're in a great time in history, and we're grateful for the opportunity to help with that. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you. Along those same lines, Steve, I'm going to go back to you on that same type of question there. How is Lockheed Martin contributing to integrated defense and improving partners and allies' sustainment capabilities?
Yeah, so that's a key point. You got to be credible. And deterrence is the credibility depends on your operational capabilities, which we have a pretty robust system between red flags, northern edges, and things like that. And then the logistical ability to support those operations. So let's start on the operation side, because like many of us up here, we're supporting that piece of it. Everybody is tracking joint air domain operations. How do you integrate joint air domain operations? You know, when I was younger, General Jumper used to term the kill chain, the F2T2EA piece of the house. And just recently, in the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years, the Joint Force is truly embracing an integrated joint air domain operations approach. And that's step one. I mean, if you got a great Air Force, Navy, or allies and Army counterparts, if we can't integrate it, we're not credible that way. But that's a sensor to shooter piece. So now comes General King's wicked problem, which is a sensor to shooter to sustainer to logistician. Because you operate in milliseconds, seconds, and maybe minutes in one kill chain, but the logistics mesh or logistics web, whatever the term of art you want to use, it could take 2.5 weeks for that barge to get there with the JP-8. Or I only have one airplane flight coming in today to do resupply or to swap out people or to do that things. So that logistics mesh, and how do you support that? Some of the tools, RMS has a tool just like many of the folks here, it's called AI, Logistics Information Decision Aid at the COCOM level. Because when General Van Oost was up here, you know, if anybody thinks we're going to be able to distribute parts in the AOR by FAD code, probably not going to get past day 2 of the war. We need a better integrated system to really get the priorities than what we have up there. So that's a high level. Then the next level, we get down to looking at how do I optimize for this hub and spoke? We do OA like everybody does, but a lot of our OA is on the ops side. what's my maximum effectiveness, probability of this, of a kill, this. But I've got, if all my parts are in the warehouse at the hub and it takes a hit, what does that mean to the rest of the spokes out there that are trying to operate? So it's your Amazon mesh, but with probabilities of kill against each one with the variable time in between. So one of the things is we put out a contract between Lockheed and Georgia Tech to develop FLOW, Focused Logistics Optimized for the Warfighter, that doesn't optimize logistics for being at a red flag at Nellis, but it optimizes the logistics for being in a deployed area where you can take hits. And now, how does that change my pre-positioning? How does that change my scheme of maneuver? How does it change how many parts I order if I have to factor out? So you kind of start at the high level, you get the credibility, you can execute. We really need to work on logistics web. One of the tools that Lockheed developed is called TOC Light, Tactical Operations Center Light. And that brings a common air picture down via like the back of a van, if you will. Well, if I'm the mission support group commander and I'm the first person to hit the deck, I'm gonna try to look at my comm setup. And we ought to have that same type of thing, a deployable 5G mesh that basically pops into a base, and within 3 hours, I'm up and running on a secure 5G mesh. How you link it into it, that's up to it. But all of those areas give us the credibility to do the things we talk about. And there's some poor LRO out here, or petroleum guy going, all right, 48 F-35s, that's 16,000 pounds each. 2 sorties a day, it's 1.6 million pounds, 240,000 gallons every day, and I haven't serviced a C-130, a C-17, or run a generator yet to power the control tower. So all of that logistics and the ability to analyze it and do variations on it is key. And that's where the resilient piece comes off. And then the final piece is we're doing Turbo, I can't pronounce his real name yesterday. He did a great job talking about all the overseas assets that Boeing has with the commercial network. We had a meeting with Admiral Malone, and he called in a whole bunch of people to talk about what can you offer overseas. Well, like Boeing, we have 350 facilities. We have about 8,000 people. And if you look in Indo-PACOM specifically, we've got 11 C-130 users, 9 H-860 users, 6 F-15 users, 4 right now F-35 users. And that gets that interoperability that General Minahan was talking about. When an aerial port crew can load an Australian C-130, a US C-130, and a Japanese, or however the case is, that gives you some of that interoperability. And then the training piece is where we get into the multi-capable, and I think General King used the term intra-capable airmen yesterday, which is, it'd really be nice if we had some of our senior airmen that were trained to make safe, launch, recover, refuel, not only their primary platform, but the 15, 16, 22, and F-35 all together. And that would be a multi-capable maintainer who could turn those airplanes, get them back into the fight. And between virtual learning and advanced tech hubs that can have all that information on it, those are all the things that I think we're working to do to put that in the hands of the guy or gal on the flight line. So I think that's the piece.
Thank you. Okay, Jenness, I'm going to switch gears for a minute here, and I want to ask you a question about the workforce, and specifically workforce talent. Given the struggles A&D has experienced recruiting and retaining top talent, does addressing the shortage of talent need to be looked at the same level of urgency as ships, chips, and munitions?
So I mean, clearly, and I don't even know that it's switching topics all that much. I think the resounding answer would be yes. We've been talking, I mean, I'm very interested in foot stomp your comments about training and having multiple skill disciplines. And so absolutely, workforce, in the end, deterrence can be enabled by technology, and it can be enabled by having the right kinds of policies and regulation in place, but it's a people business. It's about having the right people with the right skill sets, the right place and time. And so without a doubt, we must not neglect investments in our workforce. And we have a shared workforce between those in uniform, civilians with the Department of Defense, and industry. And so those investments I've already talked about earlier, the tenure changes that we've seen are all the more critical. I mean, we've always needed to invest in workforce. It's always been a people business, but given the national security environment, the pace of technological change and the threat, and then these just realities of the workforce we have today, it is all the more important. And I think so there are some investments certainly, that our companies are making and that the US government is making, and I know allies are as well, as you look at more and more countries the US rolled out a national defense industrial strategy, the Australians, did, and the EU and UK have theirs that will be coming out imminently, and others are as well. So there's this broad recognition, and there's a lot of attention being paid in those strategies to workforce. A comment I would make, though, is as we invest in skill gaps, we need to think not only about the future capabilities that will be required, because they're different, and we need to make sure we're investing in where we want to go, not in the past. Nevertheless, what is, I think, too often overlooked there are skills that are required now and will bridge into the future that we cannot overlook. An example I'll give of that is castings and forgings. I mean, Boeing, I know we talk to our suppliers, we all rely on castings and forgings for product that we deliver to the warfighter, and we will continue to do so for quite some time. But when you talk to those suppliers, their constraint is simply they don't have the people who know how to do it or are interested in that kind of work anymore. So we're gonna have to think creatively. This may involve visa programs or other kinds of skill development. We have, as a nation, the entire US economy is lagging specifically in terms of engineers and computer scientists with 4-year degrees, but also those skilled technicians with 2-year degrees or something less, but they have the on-the-job training to get it done. So we must focus on those skilled technicians and some of these other capabilities while we invest in the future. And then there are a couple other things. When I mentioned shared workforce, I certainly think we need to continue to invest in rotation programs between industry and government. That's not a revolving door. The reality is there's a shared workforce, and we have a lot that we can learn from each other. Kind of builds on the conversations we have are the most important thing. When you get into somebody else's shoes, I mean, what I've learned since coming to Boeing, there's not a week that goes by that I wish I knew that when I worked for the government. I would have been better steward of the taxpayers' dollars had I known that. And so those programs are critical. There are programs Boeing and I know others participate in terms of transition assistance programs or skill bridge programs where you're still being able to be in uniform and come do internships and see what that's like before you make your decision to make sure it's the right fit for both parties. So creativity about that kind of rotation, those sorts of rotations and internships needs to continue. And then a couple other things I'll just point to. We need to think about the defense workforce in the context of the broader US economy. And this is gonna sound, if I say this, I think a lot of folks in the room kind of will groan. But there are things in place that, for example, make it very hard for industry to offer competitive salaries to some of that talent that we want to recruit, because we're not just competing amongst ourselves, we're competing to all of that talent that's graduating from school or is getting that on-the-job experience who are being recruited outside of the defense industry. And so contracting approaches like lowest price technically acceptable, a lot of cost accounting standards and those sorts of things really inhibit the defense industry from remaining competitive. Those are things that we can address. The people in this room and outside this room can fix and address. Similarly, we hear it all the time, but security clearance reform. If we offer someone a job and it takes 6 to 8 months at best to allow them to start working, they're gonna go work somewhere else. We are not just competing within ourselves. And I would say that's particularly true within the sustainment and logistics field, where we don't, from an industry perspective, get enough security clearance slots compared to development and procurement. That's something that needs to be addressed. And I'll just conclude a little bit with a soapbox. The language set we use about industry matters. Industry, again, I'll go back to, it's a partnership. It's a partnership with our customer. And even within industry, if we continue, and I'm guilty of this too, to talk about the innovative, non-traditional defense industrial base versus the staid, old defense industrial base, there's truth in that. There's truth that underpins that. But if we perpetuate that language, we're not going to incentivize any great talent to join the traditional defense industrial base. And why would an innovative, newer company that's disrupting the status quo want to become a defense contractor if they'll get slapped with that label? So the language that we use in this space also matters and is an investment in our future. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Going to come back to Bob. If you went to LOA University and a lot of the breakout sessions, we had a great breakout session yesterday from OU on predictive analytics. It was standing room only, as most of the breakout sessions were. Fantastic job this year with that. So thank you to Rob and LOA University for putting everything together on the agenda. But Bob, a question to you. Given the need for AI-enhanced real-time actionable data to navigate bottlenecks and optimize operations, what innovative solutions is .ai developing to improve predictive analytics and tracking of assets in challenging and dynamic environments?
Wow, who wrote that question? I'm going to ask a question to the crowd again to start my thing, and then I'm going to tell a short story. So AI was asked a riddle, and it's a very simple riddle. So is Master Sergeant Mendez here? Is she here? What about Master Sergeant Shoup? Okay, they're not here. So let me ask somebody here in the front row. What came first, the chicken or the egg? I need an answer. It can't just be a shrug. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? So somebody say the egg or the chicken? Chicken. Wrong. Safety. Safety came first. That's what AI came back with as the answer. Now the story. All right. But the story of where this really comes from, and it's interesting that we're all here coming with a warfighter history, that artificial intelligence started in a room like this. And then it got smaller in Bletchley Park, and created by Alan Turing in the UK during World War II. And they were going after the Enigma machine, trying to understand cryptologically how to break that communication path. And the only way they could do that repetitive process of trying to try a number and variance was if they built a computer. Their computer was a mechanical device to be able to do this repetitive process over and over and over. And that started the term by Alan called artificial intelligence. Today, there's 4 distinct fields in artificial intelligence. You have what is called standard AI, which really gets into if you take a data set and then you just create outputs of what you call histograms. And it's just a simple chart that allows you to look at something over time. Then you have general AI that everybody thinks is going to happen to where it's a replication of you. And if you read a book called The Myth of AI, that's not going to happen. And I tend to agree with it because when you make a decision, you tend to think of environment variables as part of your decision. If you're thinking about food and you're standing in your house, it's the environment that somebody's cooking and the smell that hits your nose that then supplements your decision of whether you want that meal or not, that is taken in. But the tacit details in your decision process are very hard to be able to pull out. So, and then there's all kinds of other things about AI. We're humans and we have arms and limbs to be able to recreate things. We can be creative and actually go grab a saw and start cutting and create some wood. And now we've got a chair, and then we augment that and it becomes a couch or something else. But a computer is stuck in a box, and then it has to figure out, how do I get an arm? How do I get a leg? And do all these other things. So it might not get to where Skynet happens, Terminator stuff. So I don't think that's really going to happen. But what AI is doing today, and what .ai, as our organization is doing, is trying to create this, change the spectrum of how simple it is to be able to use. And I talked about at the beginning, everybody's using an iPhone. You probably at some point are using it for messaging and email simply because you've already been trained on how to do those on the big computer, and then you just take that skill set and put it on a smaller device. And Steve Jobs wanted it even more simply when we were first creating and working on iTunes back in 2000, 99, 2000. He's like, I just want it to be simple to be able to get music. And one of the unique parts of that evolution was he didn't want a big training program to go from the computer to a handheld device. And the only way to do that was leveraging some kind of machine process that made it simple. So transparency from one device to another, make it easy. So the application skills you learn for messaging and email should also come into logistics. And that's what we've been doing, is wanting to make it simple so you can actually trace that digital thread. You know how to navigate a website because you're looking at a menu on the left-hand side. And it can be intuitive by saying, where are my locations? Where are my assets? And show me the map. Click, click, click. Now, the hard part tends to be is how do you start tracking assets, right? And everybody has seen the Apple AirTag or the Tile as devices that you can put around your dog's neck if they run away. Well, let's leverage that kind of technology in the logistics space. Why not? But we also have dependencies. How many people are from Minot? We talked to people from there. When you have a battery running in the cold, it tends to die off very quickly, versus it likes warm spaces like we do. So you can't always rely on a battery to be able to pull an asset tag. So you need to think about some kind of radio frequency charging to that asset tag. But RFID, as it was first invented in 1984, doesn't meet the requirements today because it requires this big, huge hand scanner, right? And how many people have actually used RFID in this room? Anybody? Yeah. How many people have lost that hand scanner or didn't charge it, right? But how many people have charged their iPhone every night, right? Because if you don't, your partner will make sure it's charged so they can get a hold of you in case they need to pick up the kids or, pick up some additional groceries on the way home for dinner, right? So let's leverage that mobile device you carry to be able to help track those assets. Now, I understand there's some sensitivity, especially when I'm looking at industry, and I'm mostly in the commercial world with our solution, but there's sensitivity to some of the types of logistics information that can be tracked, whether it's assets of people or weapons. Obviously, there's some security and compliance information that we need to be sensitive about. So it shouldn't be on all mobile devices. But that information and its digital thread about where it's at and what it's doing should be simple and easy. And that's what AI has been developing. Now, the augment to that is with artificial intelligence is radio frequency to be able to track assets can't be everywhere. But what usually is everywhere is we've got a string of cameras filming us now. Is we can augment and overlay with artificial intelligence using video streams to be able to identify types of assets and say, it doesn't have an asset tag, but that's a couch, or that's a missile fin, or that's an F-35, a wing bolt, whatever it might be, to be able to then track that asset and see where it's gone. And then you can assign that to people or location depending on what needs to be done. That's what .ai is trying to deliver to the market, and it's available today.
Fascinating. Okay. All right, Jonathan. Earlier you talked about how your company is focused on improving training. So how are the latest technological innovations being integrated into your training solutions?
Yeah, thanks, Carol. It really is an exciting time in technology right now. because the barriers for XR technology in particular are really dropping like crazy. And the technology itself is finally proving a lot of ways that we hoped it would over time. And as we start to mix that with AI and some other capabilities, it's really going to do some amazing things. But even what we can do today, by my standards, is pretty amazing. And General Dietrich touched on these yesterday really well, explaining that virtual reality in particular is such a great training mechanism because you can do things in VR that you can't do in the real world. But best of all, you're learning by doing, right? You immerse people in an environment and have them learn by doing so that instead of listening to a lecture or a CBT, or my favorite, standing around in a group of airmen watching somebody else do a task and assuming you're learning it, they have to prove to themselves and to the computer who's grading them the whole time that they are learning, right? And so by doing that, you don't need as many instructors anymore because the computer is doing the training for you and the grading for you. So as the General mentioned yesterday, you can free up some of those NCOs to maybe make some more difficult capstone exercises that we can't yet do in VR. We will someday. Or maybe free them up to go back to the line to do the jobs that you need them to do for the mission. But there's just so many things that you can do in VR. You can see things from vantage points that you can't see in reality. You can illustrate things that you can't see in reality. And so people can really learn at a much faster rate and a much better retention rate than they can currently. And you can put them in scenarios and let them try out some operational things. And best of all, you can break a perfectly good airplane in VR or fall off of it or lose to the enemy, and it's okay. You learn from it, right? You get better so that in reality, you're more confident, you're more ready, and you're more capable. It's a neat time.
Great. Okay, I think we've got a few minutes left. Is Jacqueline out there that we can maybe grab a couple questions?
I'm right here, ma'am.
Great.
As you look at the great power competition, do you think the nature of our economy would allow a World War II style mobilization of industry toward a large peer conflict? Is that even possible with the global and just-in-time nature of the manufacturing supply system?
To take that one. Bob?
I have a thought. Does anybody watch Peter Zeihan? Do you know who Peter Zeihan is? Talks about demographics and geography, but one of his discussions was really about how the United States, and he actually has a book called The Accidental Superpower about the United States. And in that book, he talks about how we're one of the unique nations in the world because of our geography, based in navigable waterways, what do we have for ports, what we have for energy, that we can create something that no other country in the world can actually provide. So we have the energy density to be able to reindustrialize the entire nation. But the demographic problem and the people problem become the bigger challenge for us in our skill sets. So it's going to take training and expertise to be able to deliver, but I truly think that we could if we needed to. And we've seen some amazing things from our own people in our world when conflicts happen, how we bond and come together, right? From 2011 and other types of events like that, I think we absolutely can do something amazing.
Can I build on that?
Absolutely.
A little bit? So I agree. I think the answer is yes. The thing we need to think through is that it's not going to be just a repetition. I think too many people talk about Freedom's Forge and sort of a repetition of World War II. The US economy and US industry is different. It is much more specialized. We have different skill sets as part of that specialization. So while it's not just a kind of a rinse and repeat, absolutely. The US and US industry partnered with our government, and in this case, our military customers, I firmly believe can do anything. And I think what we need to consider in order to make that reality happen is that it goes back to some of these other themes that you've talked about. Technology solutions we need for that kind of scenario are already in large measure present. What we need are pioneering behaviors now to embrace those kinds of new operating models, new technologies, and grow them at scale. If we begin to develop that kind of muscle memory to do that now, we will be able to respond if necessary, and it will be a very effective deterrent to that kind of conflict. What I worry about more is more the political nature of that decision. And do we have senior leaders in this country who are willing to take the case to the American people and get the will of the American people behind that? But in terms of industry, I believe if we start now in terms of thinking about doing things differently and embracing the kinds of technology that's already available, we can get there. Great. Thanks.
In some areas, like cyber sustainment and execution, we are the near peer to our more capable adversaries. Can you talk about how we can assertively leverage policy on commercial industry to get the capabilities the DoD needs to prevent our adversaries from being victorious?
Cyber guy?
Wow, that's quite a question. Who asked that? Can I stand up? It's interesting that we talk about policy, and in reality, we're all practicing something. You know, you have think good OPSEC. I don't know if anybody else grew up like I did in Europe. You know, my dad was stationed in Heidelberg. Worked at NATO, and we used to watch AFRTS. And one of the things was, don't shop when you're hungry, right? But it's also the things of think good OPSEC as a commercial. And it became part of the family mantra was you didn't talk about your customers, and you didn't talk about your finances, and you didn't give away, you didn't try and make yourself a mark for that. But I think policy-wise, the evolution, where traditionally we've been this defensive force as for our adversaries, is we'll just sit there and wait. We'll build a big fortress and we'll protect. In that transition, when we started up the 24th Air Force to now we have this offensive capability in cyber warfare is pretty interesting. But that also needs to change in, you know, policy on the United States. If an ISP or a person is attacked, it's actually illegal for me to go after the adversary that attacked me, other than through the court, right? And it's not that I want to send them a nuclear weapon, right? But I do want to make it painful for them to come back after me, right? You know, you have this castle doctrine that we have in policy. If somebody's attacking your house, you can protect yourself in some kind of strong manner. And I think policy in cyber needs to happen, needs to evolve at the pace that which is happening. In the UK, when the ransomware hit, a few years ago, there was the average 68% of all businesses paid a ransom to try and recover their business. And what's even scarier is the median payout was about 50,000 euro to be able to recover their assets. So the amount of money that gets put into just ransomware response is quite significant. It's even bigger than the gaming and movie industry combined, which is quite significant. So we need policy needs to focus on that chain of evidence. But with cryptocurrency and all these other things that are becoming dominant, it's going to be very complex, very complex.
Just to follow a little bit, I think the key, and industry learned this early, you know, a couple decades ago, is that we need to be partners on the cyber defense with our DoD counterparts as well. Because we can't have each of us learn it individually or episodically. If there is a threat, and I know we have the professionals out there making it, but I guess to the policy piece, those making the decisions realize that their OEM, their industrial partners need to be right with them in lockstep in terms of countering and preparing and doing these things, because, you know, otherwise we'll get peeled off one at a time.
Okay, well, we're going to finish a few seconds early. I want to thank all of our panel members, Jonathan, Steve, Bob, and Jenness. great discussion here. We've had thanks for great discussion, and hopefully we'll see you back next year with LOA and see how things have evolved with technology and all the innovations that are out there. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Carol.
All right.